mainly around fast days, Shabbos, Chagim, all sorts of things. All these things. I remember every single week we would have someone come to the house Friday night during the meal. Dad would disappear for a few minutes, come back and have another l'chaim. But he has built up a knowledge over many years of medicine and halacha, and has given shiurim all around the world, all over the place. And for many years, for as long as I can remember, I remember Jewish youth study groups when I was very, very little. And even probably before I was born, Dad was lecturing and giving shiurim on Jewish medical ethics, and he continues to do so, and we're very blessed to have him. And we're also very blessed to be here with all of the people from Israel, from London, from Manchester, from all around the world. And it's amazing that we can connect and we can learn together tonight. So, b'chavod, my favorite dad, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan, and thank you for to Liat, really, because I think this idea was Liat's brainchild, that we should do a shiur on the ideas of Shabbat and medicine. I'm very, very pleased to see some very familiar faces who I see regularly on my shiurim, and I'm even more pleased to see the ones that I don't see regularly. There are familiar faces that I can see from Manchester. There are familiar faces that I can see from other parts of Israel, and there are familiar faces that I can see from Perth. I've been fortunate to go to Perth on 3 occasions so far. Please, I should have been going last month 2 months ago in January. We planned to come, but of course we're not allowed to do that right now. I'm hoping to be there next time in December to see England regain the Ashes, and that is my plan, is to be with you in December for the Perth Test. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all in person then. But in the meantime, it's really good to see you all, and even those whose faces I don't recognize from Perth. I certainly recognize the names of those that comment on the Ridiculous Not blog every week. And it's good to see you too. Now, just a little word of warning, which I hope will not occur, but I need to give you a warning, and that is this. I did a Brit this morning, which did not go as straightforward as it might have done. And it was a bit of a bleeder, as we say. It happens from time to time. Thank God it all seemed to settle down, but I've given the parents instructions to look carefully. And if in the middle of this shiur they contact me and say that it started to bleed again, then I will have to disappear in the middle. So I apologize if that happens, but if it does, it does, because even with technology as good as this, I can't be in 2 places at one time. So I hope it won't happen, but if it does, please forgive me. Now, let me just first of all tell you a little bit about Techelet. You can see the banner behind my head, and you can see the banner behind Avril's head. Avril is my trusty right hand in Techelet, without whom we wouldn't have most of these things. We certainly wouldn't have the nice flyers and the source sheet, which I'm going to show you. So thank you to Avril for that. Techelet is an organization which I have started off with 2 colleagues. And you probably can't see it because it's very small, but underneath the English word Techelet and the little logo, it says Inspiring Judaism. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be inspiring about our Judaism. Avril will put on the chat at some point during the day our Facebook link and our website link, so you can have a look at the various videos and other stuff that we've got, which hopefully will inspire you. So there's the plug for Techelet. Let's get down to our subject. Now, this is a subject which is particularly close to my heart, and that is breaking Shabbat. Now, that's not to say that I like to break Shabbat, but there are certain times when it must happen. And the reason it's particularly close to my heart is that we had in Manchester a number of years ago an absolute tragedy of an avoidable death because the people did not know. Let me just mute everybody. Thank you. Can I ask anybody who's not muted to do so, please, because we've got a bit of feedback. Okay, that's lovely. Thank you. Okay, so we had this avoidable death where somebody who was very knowledgeable didn't do something that he should have done on Shabbat, and as a result, he was very ill and he had a cardiac arrest and he died, and that was a totally avoidable death. And following that, I gave a shiur in Manchester about this very subject, about the importance of knowing when one must break Shabbat, and if one has to break Shabbat because of health matters, how to do it. Now, I'm going to share with you my screen, which has a source sheet on it. I or Avril will send you this source sheet afterwards. I'll put it on the chat so that you can download it, or I'll send it to Dan and he can send it out to whoever wants it. But in the meantime, I hope you can see the source sheet on the screen. Can you see that? Yeah, okay, good. Now, if I were to say to you, what are the most important mitzvot that defines us as Jewish people, I think that all of you would have in your top 3 or 4 the mitzvah of Shabbat. It's what defines us as Jews. The stories are numerous of people who have given up all sorts of things, their livelihoods, their jobs, careers, in order to keep Shabbat. Many people will be familiar with the stories of the American immigrants at the beginning of the 20th century who arrived in the Lower East Side of New York, would get a job on a Sunday or a Monday morning in some kind of sweatshop. And then on Friday, they would leave at lunchtime and say, I've got to go now because it's Shabbat and I'm not coming tomorrow. And the boss would say, well, don't bother coming on Monday either, you're fired. And they would have to start all over again the following Monday because Shabbat was very important. Shabbat is probably the most fundamental of our mitzvot that we do. If we define a person as being an Orthodox Jew, somebody who is a religious person, we describe them as somebody who is Shomer Shabbat, somebody who keeps Shabbat. We don't describe them as somebody who is Shomer Kashrut or somebody who is Shomer Brit Milah or Shomer Pesach. We describe that person as Shomer Shabbat because Shabbat is a most fundamental mitzvah. It's one of the most important things that actually define us as Jews. Physically, for the men at least, what defines us as Jews is Brit Milah. We have the sign, it's called the Ot. The sign of the covenant is in our flesh. We say that in the Birchat Hamazon, in benching. But the spiritual sign of the Jew is Shabbat. We say it in Kiddush, don't we? Ot Hili Olam. Shabbat is an everlasting sign for the Jewish people. Beini uvein bnei Israel. God says between me and between bnei Israel, Ot Hili Olam. It is an everlasting sign. He's referring to Shabbat. Shabbat is the sign. It is the signpost. It is the sign. It is the symbol of the Orthodox Jew. Shabbat is the most fundamental thing we do, and so therefore we have to treat it with great respect. We have to be very careful. It's not something we can be cavalier with because it is so important to us. And in fact, there are, I may be wrong on this, but I've only can think of 2 things which override Shabbat. One of them is Brit Milah. If we have a baby born on a Shabbat, then the Brit Milah will happen on the 8th day, which will be Shabbat. Normally, you would not do anything which would cause bleeding on Shabbat. It's one of the malachot that you can't do, but we do push aside Shabbat for the Brit Milah. So that's one of them. And the only other thing, I may be wrong on this, maybe Dan can think of another one, but the only other thing that pushes aside Shabbat is something called Pikuach Nefesh, which means saving a soul. Literally, Pikuach means to look over, to be careful of a soul. In other words, it means to save a soul. If you just give me 1 second, please. I just need to make sure my wife is not taking those car keys that she's just taken away and taking the car, because I might need it. Just give me a second, please, and I will be back. Al? Sorry about that. We might need the car keys to rush off, so I had to rescue them there. Sorry. So we've said that Shabbat is fundamental. Let me show you the source sheet on the screen. These are not all of the places in the Torah where Shabbat is mentioned. They are some of them. Right at the beginning of Bracelet, we see, and God blessed the seventh day. We're familiar with that from Kiddush. God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy, and he abstained from all his work that God created to do. So this is the source of Shabbat. We then have in Shemot 6 days, Sheshet Yamim Til Ketuhu, where you gather the man on the seventh day. This is the where the Jewish people in the desert were given man. And then we go on to the 10 Commandments. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat lekadesho. Remember the Sabbath day and sanctify it. And then later on, we speak about the keeping Shabbat. And we keep going and we keep going and we keep going. All of these are there in the source sheet for you. These are not all of them, but there's just a selection of psukim in the Torah which speak about Shabbat. So Shabbat is utterly fundamental. But it's trumped, if you like, only by 2 things. One is Brit Milah, as we said, and the other is Pikuach Nefesh. Now, before we come on to how it's trumped and why it's trumped, this is a beautiful expression of Achad Ha'am, who was a poet in the early Zionist years. And he said, more than the Jewish people have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. Today, Jews continue to keep and maintain the Shabbat. So what Achad Ha'am, who by the way was a secular Jew, said that Shabbat has kept the Jews. And this is what I was referring to earlier. Shabbat is the glue which has kept us together, and it is not to be messed with. It has to be something which is extremely looked after extremely carefully. So if we're going to say that Shabbat is something we have to be extremely careful with, but there are times when we have to override Shabbat, and we'll come to those later on. We need to delve down a bit deeper into the concept of Shabbat. We have a spiritual concept of Shabbat, which is that we desist from work, we rest, we become Vayinafash, Shavat Vayinafash. We say in Kiddush, God rested Vayinafash from the word Nephesh, soul. His soul became refreshed, if you like. So there's a spiritual aspect of Shabbat, which is to refresh our souls, Vayinafash, from the word Nephesh. But of course, there are 2 aspects to Shabbat. There's Zachor, remember the Shabbat day, and Shamor, guard the Shabbat day. In the 10 Commandments, there are 2 versions of the 10 Commandments. I'm sure you're familiar with that. One in Parshat Va'et Chanan, one in Parshat Yitro, and then in Va'et Chanan. And the 2 expressions, Shamor v'Zachor, we say it in Lecha Dodi every week. Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad. There's 2 aspects to Shabbat. There's guarding Shabbat and remembering Shabbat. Remembering Shabbat is doing things in order to remember Shabbat, having nice food, having all your best cutlery and crockery out for Shabbat. That is how you recognize and remember Shabbat. Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, guarding the Shabbos day, that is being careful not to do the things that we shouldn't do. And this is where the conflict between Pikuach Nefesh, saving somebody's life or somebody who is ill, and Shabbat comes in. So we have to delve down deeper into the ideas of the things that one doesn't do on Shabbat, the Shamor et Yom HaShabbat aspect of it. And we're going to look at source 3 in a moment. But before we just look at that there, it's become quite popular now, the spiritual aspect of Shabbat, which spills over into the physical aspect of Shabbat, has become quite popular with secular Jews and also with non-Jewish people. There is something, I don't know if any of you have heard of it, it's called Switch Off Saturday or Switch Off Sunday. And there are people now who take out a day of their week and they switch off all their electronic devices. They don't look at their phones, they don't look at their computers, they don't have their Blackberries or whatever else it is that they have, their iPhones. Everything is switched off for a day. Does that sound familiar to you? Well, it's a very modern idea, this switch off Saturday or switch off Sunday. But of course, ein chadash tachat hashemesh, there's nothing new under the sun. We've been doing that for centuries. So in terms of the things that we don't do on Shabbat, there's a whole list of them, of course, but they're split up. Let's go into source 3. What source 3? There are two ideas here. One is called Deoraita and one is Derabanan. You can probably see the word rabbi in there, Derabanan, and that's deliberate. Deoraita, the word oraita means the Torah. It's Aramaic. It means the Torah. The word Torah itself comes from the word lahorot, to teach. The word moreh, teacher, is the same root as Torah. So oraita means Torah or instruction, and it comes from the Hebrew word or, which means light. So if you teach somebody, we have this in English, don't we? If you teach somebody, they become enlightened. You enlighten somebody. So that is where the root of the word Torah. So deoraita is an Aramaic expression that means a law which is based directly from the Torah itself. So we have, for example, we'll come to that in source 4, certain things we can't do on Shabbat, which are Torah prohibitions, and they are known as deoraita. There are other prohibitions which the rabbis added on to those which come from the Torah, and they are called derabanan because they come from the rabbis. And those are things that the rabbis added on to the main deoraita laws in order to protect the deoraita laws. And we can think of that as a fence around the Torah. If you go to a museum and there is a very valuable artifact in that museum, you will usually find that there is a rope stopping you going too close to it because they don't want you to touch it and they don't want you to spoil it and they don't want you to, by mistake, do something to that artifact which will ruin it for other people. And so they put this little, usually this rope around the exhibit, and that's an indication that you shouldn't go too close. Another example is the yellow line. I don't know if it's yellow in Australia, but it's yellow here in Israel. The yellow line on the train platform. So you don't go too close to the platform edge. There's a yellow line, a meter or two away from the platform's edge, and you're not meant to go over the yellow line. And that's a guard, if you like, so that you don't come into too much danger of falling off the end of the platform. The Dirabanan laws were put there so that they would be a fence, a yellow line to the platform, or our rope around the artifact, so that we don't come close to breaking a rule that we shouldn't break from the Torah. So they are less, they have less power, if you like, than the laws from the Torah. The Torah was given, we believe the Torah was given by God himself to Moshe at Har Sinai. The first parak of Pirkei Avot tells us that Moshe passed it on to Yehoshua. Yehoshua passed it on to the elders passed it on to the prophets, etc., etc., and eventually it came down to us. That's how we got the Torah. And so the Torah comes directly from God. So the laws that are deoraita have the greatest power. The secondary laws, let's call them that, the laws which are there to protect the deoraitas, which are known as derabanan, they have less power, if you like, and therefore we might be more inclined to ease up on those in certain circumstances. And so there's one application here which I put in source 3. Excuse me, that is not a necessary call. And that is here. Have a look over here in source 3 where my pointer is. One application of the difference is that when you're in doubt as to whether you've done a certain mitzvah, if it is a derabanan, you follow the principle of safek derabanan lekula. In other words, if you're not sure, then we are lenient about it. We say, okay, well, if you're not sure, we'll take the lenient aspect because it is, inverted commas, only a derabanan. However, if you are safek deoraita, if there's a doubt about whether you have done a Torah law, for example, if you can't remember whether you've said Shema, it's a Torah law to say the Shema twice a day. So if you get to bedtime and you think, I don't remember whether I've said Shema or not, I may not. Well, then you have to say it again because that is a Torah law. So that is we go safek deoraita lechumra. So it's important if we're going to look at these laws, should we be stringent or should we be lenient? It's important to know what we're dealing with. Are we dealing with a deoraita or are we dealing with a derabanan? So we need to bear this in mind as we go through the ideas that we're going to talk about now. So some examples of deoraita Shabbat restrictions. So these are from the Torah law. These are basically the 39 what are known as Av Melachot. Melacha, you'll be familiar with that word. It's badly translated as work. It's impossible really to translate it accurately, but it's translated as work. And the reason it's translated as work is that back in the day, before automation or electrification of things, most of these 39 things of categories of, let's call them creative activity, were actually hard work. So for example, threshing and writing and tanning and all the 39 categories, main categories of work, which were based on the work that went on in the Mishkan, which we're learning about and reading about in the current parshiot of the week. 39 categories of melacha, of types of work, the Torah forbids on Shabbat, and in an attempt to get us to be switch off Saturday people. So in other words, we switch off not just machinery, but we switch off all creative activity. Rabbi Emanuel Jakubowicz, the Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the previous chief rabbi, but one before Rabbi Sachs, he was once asked about whether human cloning was forbidden according to Jewish law. And he said, there is nothing wrong with human cloning in the act of human cloning. In other words, there is nothing in the process of human cloning that I can say to you is forbidden. You're not committing adultery. You're not dishonoring your parents. You're not breaking Shabbat. You're not eating non-kosher food. There is no physical act in cloning that you cannot do according to the Torah. But should you do it? No. He said, actually, his answer was not yet. And that was in the late 1980s. He said not yet, because he was concerned about the moral aspects of this. And of course, we're still in that period where we're not clear about the moral aspects of many of the things we do. But the point that he was making, and he quoted the verse from Kiddush, Shabbat vayinafash. We celebrate Shabbat not as let me just check that that's not, okay, very good. That's my Brit. Everything is okay, so I can relax a bit now. Sorry about that. So Rabbi Jakubowicz said that we celebrate Shabbat not because God stopped doing things because he was tired. Vayinafash, Shabbat Vayinafash doesn't mean that he put his feet up because he was knackered after 6 days of hard creativity and making man and making trees and the earth. I mean, if we had to do all that creation, we'd be exhausted at the end of it. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not need to put his feet up. What Rabbi Jakubowicz was saying is that, and this is a fundamental point about Shabbat, is that Shabbat is a time when we stop creating, not because we can't, but because we don't. We have to know when it is right to not do something. And he answered this with regard to cloning. He said, now is not the time when we should be doing human cloning. Maybe there will come a time in the future when we will. But at the time he was asked the question, he said, not yet, even though the act itself was not a forbidden act. And this is the greatness of a mind like Lord Jakubowicz, who was able to say that although we can do something technically and halachically, we mustn't do it, at least not yet. And so therefore it's important that we have a look at these malachot, not as physical hard work, because although originally they were physical hard work, it's not difficult or hard work to press a button to put the TV on. But that's not the thing that we do on Shabbat. Somebody asked me yesterday, how will it be? What's the halacha with Alexa? I don't know if any of you have got Alexa. I don't have Alexa, but some of you may have Alexa. It says, this Alexa is this thing that you speak to and it does it for you, wherever it is, all connected with your Google and your computer. And it says, Alexa, switch on the light. And Alexa will switch on the light. So can you say to Alexa on Shabbat, Alexa, what was the score of the match, please? Did Manchester United win this Shabbat? What have you done? Technically, you've spoken. There's nothing forbidden about speaking on Shabbat. Should you do such a thing? I would argue, in the same way as Rabbi Lord Jakubowicz did, that no, that's not the right thing to do, even though technically we're not doing something wrong. So the malachot, how have we got onto that? Because I was explaining to you what malacha is. It's not physical work necessarily. It's creativity. So there are 39 categories of creativity, which are examples of dioraita. And they are, if you like, first division, top Premier League mitzvot of Shabbat, or prohibitions on Shabbat, which we need to be very careful about. Second division ones are, or championship ones, if you're following the UK example, is the Derabanan. Now, the most common one that you'll be familiar on is muktzah. I'm sure that many of you, probably all of you, will know what is muktzah. Muktzah means you can't move a certain item on Shabbat. What you might not know is that muktzah is a derabanan. Why did the Rabbanan say you can't move a certain item? Because you might come then to use that item to do something forbidden. So let's take the example of a pen. To write on Shabbat is one of the 39 av malachot, and therefore it is dioraita. It is one of the Torah laws. Why is that? Because it's all part of coloring, which was done in the Mishkan, and so writing is an av malacha. It's a dioraita. Now, according to the Torah, are you allowed to pick up a pen on Shabbat? Yes. According to the Torah, yes. There is nothing in the Torah that tells you that you should, that you are not allowed to pick up a pen. You're not allowed to write with it. So the rabbis came along and painted their yellow line on the platform, or put their rope around the artifact and said, you know what? We are going to forbid you even to pick up a pen. Because if you pick up a pen, even though the Torah says you can, there's a decent chance you're going to come along and write with that pen. Why otherwise would you pick up the pen? So why otherwise would you go close to the platform over the yellow line? Why would you cross the rope and go to the artifact unless you're going to do something to that artifact and you might come to break it? So the muktzah was a fence around the av malachot that the Rabbanan put. But because it's a Rabbanan, we can be less stringent about it. So I've spent a significant amount of time painting the picture of Shabbat, because it's important to know that we don't regard Shabbat lightly. It is right up there with the most important things that we do. It defines a Jew. However, we are a religion which values one thing over almost all other things, and that is life. Okay, it may seem sometimes that people who appear to be religious and observant Jews don't value life because they do things which are not correct, and they don't value life. So, for example, you might see somebody who looks to be a very Orthodox Jew smoking. You should know that smoking is forbidden. It's an addiction, and some people can't help it, and they're not able to stop smoking. But the truth is that according to the Jewish law, smoking is forbidden. Why is smoking forbidden? Because everybody in the entire planet now knows that smoking causes disease and can, lo aleinu, it can kill people. So we have a mitzvah to look after ourselves. And there we come to source number 5. And this is where the tension between our super duper important mitzvah of Shabbat, the mitzvah which has kept the Jews as a people for 3,500 years, comes into conflict with a fundamental principle of Judaism, which is that we value life above everything else. And this is where the whole conflict arises. And this is why we had, sadly, that tragic avoidable death that I mentioned to you a little while ago. So I want to talk to you now, looking at source number 5, Pikuach Nefesh. What does this word mean? Pikuach means watching over. If you are, this is for the Israelis. If you are parked on a red and white pavement thing where you're not meant to park, what you don't want is a pakach, pei kufchet, a pakach coming along. What is a pakach? I don't know what you call it in Australia, but we in England call him a traffic warden. It means the guy that comes along gives you a ticket for parking in the wrong place. I don't know what you call. What do you call them in Australia, Dan? What's a traffic warden in Australia? Dan's disappeared. He's turned off his camera and gone for sleep. Come on, one of you Australians, what do you call a traffic warden? Anyone? Well, anyway, whoever's trying to speak to me, unmute yourself and tell me what a traffic warden's called. Anyway, it doesn't matter. In Hebrew,
it's a ranger.
A ranger. I knew he wasn't a traffic warden. Thank you. A ranger. Okay.
Mamza.
Mamza. Yeah, that as well. Yeah. Okay.
I texted you what they're called here, Dad.
Oh, did you? All right. Let me have a look at the text. Might be rude. I better not show it on the screen. Yes, it is rude. I better not show it on the screen. Right. So, yes, they're called all those things, but in Hebrew, they're called a pakach, because a pakach is somebody who is watching over to make sure that you don't park in the wrong place. So you do not want a pakach walking by. It's the same word here as Pikuach Nefesh. We know what Nephesh is. Nephesh is the soul. Nephesh is the life. Nephesh is the blood. Adam hua Nephesh. Adam is the blood. Dam is the soul. Blood is the soul of a person. Soul is a person's life. So Pikuach Nefesh literally means watching over your soul. But in principle, what it means is saving a Jewish life. As it said here, is the principle of Jewish law that the preservation of human life overrides virtually any other religious rule. It says virtually any other because there are 3 things which trump Pikuach Nefesh. In certain circumstances, and those 3 things are what are known as the 3 cardinal sins. They are murder. So in other words, if somebody says to you, murder him or I'll murder you, you're not allowed to murder him. You have to allow yourself to you have to give up your life for that. The other two are sexual immorality and true idol worship, which really doesn't exist today. But apart from those three cardinal sins, Pikuach Nefesh, as it says here, overrides any other religious rule. So Shabbat is not one of the three cardinal sins. So if you have a case of Pikuach Nefesh, that will override Shabbat. The devil is in the detail, of course. What exactly do we mean by Pikuach Nefesh? Does it literally mean and only mean somebody who is in immediate life-threatening danger? Or does it have wider ramifications? In the same way as we have said over here in source number 4, that the concept of Shabbat, oh, go away. Sorry. In the same way as we said in source 4, concept of Shabbat is expanded beyond the literal expressions in the Torah, the 39 Av Malachot. So Pikuach Nefesh is expanded from the fundamental aspect of life-threatening problem to include other situations which are not immediately life-threatening, but which the rabbis have expanded to include. Now, what we're seeing here is the other side, the flip side of the coin, because with Shabbat, what the rabbis have done is they have added in extra restrictions to the basic Shabbat laws. It's a bit like lahavdil. If you buy a car, you can either buy the basic model, which comes with the various standard bits. You'll get some seats and a steering wheel and an engine and a gearbox, or you can expand it and get the extra super duper bits and get all the computerized bits and all the added extras that you want. The Derabanans are the added extras for Shabbat, but they're added extras of prohibitions. They make more prohibitions. The flip side of that is Pikuach Nefesh. What the rabbis have done is they've said, okay, Pikuach Nefesh, saving a soul, saving a life, obviously overrides Shabbat. But we're going to add on extra things which override Shabbat. So they have, if you like, expanded the things which make Shabbat less kept. So it's the flip side of the Derabanans of Shabbat. So what we're saying here is this, that, and it's an important point, because if we only see the rabbis as adding on extra prohibition over prohibition over prohibition, and all the rabbis want to do is make life difficult for us, then that can be a very uninspiring and negative aspect that we would see. We would look at our religion in a very negative way. We see the flip side, and we see Pikuach Nefesh, we see the rabbis say, we are going to expand this to include situations which are not immediately life-threatening, but we will say to you, yes, that overrides the Shabbat, even though Shabbat's very important, because more important is the idea of Pikuach Nefesh. And where do we get this idea of Pikuach Nefesh? It is also in the Torah, and this is very, very important. I've given you one very important pasuk here. It's in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 18, verse 5. I want to read it with you. Ushmartem et chukotai. You must keep my statutes. A statute is a law of the Torah that perhaps we don't really fully understand. Even if we don't understand it, God says, I want you to keep it. Ve'et mishpatai, and my judgments, my ordinances. I don't know what an ordinance was when I first saw this pasuk. I thought it was something to do with maps. You know, you have ordinance survey maps, but I don't think it is. What it means is mishpatai means the laws that we can understand. Like we understand that it's not right to steal. We understand that it's not right to do bad things to people. Chukotai, an example of chukotai, an example of a statute, which we don't fully understand, would be para aduma, the red heifer. We don't really understand why we have to do that, but we still have to do it. So we have to do all the laws. That's what God says. Ushmartem, and you shall guard my statutes and my laws. Asher yaseh otam, so that ha'adam, so that a person shall do them. Yaseh from oseh. Vachai bahem, and he shall live by them. Ani Hashem, I am God. That two words, those two little words there, vachai bahem, is the fundamental point of Pikuach Nefesh. This tells us that we are not to keep the Torah and die by it. The rabbis say, v'chai bahem v'lo yamut bahem. You're meant to live by the Torah, not die by the Torah. So if keeping the Torah, apart from those three cardinal sins which we mentioned, if keeping the Torah is going to cause you to be very unwell and even possibly, God forbid, lose your life, then that's not what God wants. God wants you to keep the Torah only if you can vachai bahem, only if you can live by them. This is the fundamental point about Pikuach Nefesh. This is where it comes from. You remember right at the beginning, I said to you that after this tragic death in Manchester a few years ago, I gave a shiur about the halachot of breaking Shabbat, and I called the shiur by the name Vachai Bahem, and you shall live by them, because this is the most important thing of all. If you have a look in the prophet Yechezkel, there's another pasuk which says exactly the same thing. Yechezkel, the prophet Ezekiel, he says, I gave them my statutes and I gave them my ordinances. Hodati otam, I taught them, I made them known to them. Asher yaseh otam ha'adam, and again, vachai bahem. The prophet Ezekiel tells us again, in case we forgot it from Vayikra, the prophet Yechezkel tells us again, it's got to be vachai bahem. Now, we go into the Gemara. The Gemara here, Talmud Bavli, Masechet Yoma 84b. I haven't given you the actual quotation here, but if you want to go and look it up, you can look it up in Safaria. Go onto Google and put in Safaria. It's got all of the Gemara in Hebrew and in English, or Aramaic and in English. Go to 84b and you'll see the following story. You'll see a situation where the rabbis ask, what's the halacha? You're walking past a wall and you see that a wall has fallen down on Shabbat and it is crushing a person, a child as it so happens in this story. And the rabbis ask, are you allowed to move those stones? You're not really allowed to move stones on Shabbat. It's one of the malachot. You can't move them. They're muksa. So the rabbis say, of course you've got to move those stones because the person underneath might still be alive. And you've got to do everything you possibly can, including breaking Shabbat, in order to save a life. And the rabbis say very clearly in this Gemara that the overriding principle is vachai bahem. You have to break Shabbat if it saves a life. Now that's obvious that you have to break Shabbat if it's to save a life. The example given in the Gemara, if I were to ask any of you here today, should you break Shabbat in order to save somebody's life, Jewish or not Jewish makes no difference, you would all answer, of course. To save a life, you must break Shabbat. And that's easy. If that was all there was to it, we could stop there and we could pack it in. But as I said to you before, the rabbis did the flip side of source 4 in source 5, and it brought us to source 7. What the rabbis did were they said, we are going to categorize sick people into various categories, and within those categories, we will give you advice on how you should behave in that situation on Shabbat. So going from the most stringent to the most stringent in terms of Pikuach Nefesh to the least, they basically made 3 categories of sick person. And when you are deciding what to do on Shabbat, you have to look at the scenario and you have to decide which category does this person fall into. This is the halachic procedure. So the halacha tells us that there are three basic categories. And I've got them there for you in source 7. Let's start at the top. Choleh means a sick person. Sheyesh bo sakana. Sakana means dangerous. You'll see in Israel on the signs there, sivuvim sakunim, dangerous curves. Means, you know, you're going in a road and you've got a bend in the road which is dangerous. Sakana means dangerous. By the way, the root of that word is also the word for knife in Hebrew is sakin. I'm sure you all know that. Sakin is a knife. Well, that comes from the same word because knives are very dangerous. So that's just a little bit of Hebrew etymology. Those of you that come to my shiurim regularly will know that I like to throw in a bit of etymology now and again. So there's today's etymology. The word sakin comes from sakana. So choleh sheyesh bo sakana, a sick person who is in danger. So I've written here in life-threatening danger. Now, that seems very straightforward because if you're in life-threatening danger, we've already said, no shilas, you break Shabbat. The difficulty that we have is that we may think somebody is not in life-threatening danger, or they may themselves think they're not in life-threatening danger, and actually they are. And actually the rabbis are very, very careful about this, and they expand this idea of a choleh sheyesh bo sakana, a sick person who is in life-threatening danger, to people who actually are not in danger, but might be in danger. And so because the rabbis were extremely careful about everything they did, and they were the most careful about the most important mitzvah in the entire Torah, which is not Shabbat, and not Pesach, and not Brit Milah, but Pikuach Nefesh. V'chai b'hem is the most important mitzvah in the Torah, apart from the 3 cardinal sins that we've said. So they were very, very careful. And they said, if there is any suggestion that this person may be in danger or may come into danger at a later time, then we put them in that category. An example of somebody who is not in life-threatening danger, but the rabbis put them into that category as far as breaking Shabbat is concerned, is a diabetic patient who has to give themselves injections of insulin. Now, giving injections of insulin, halachically on Shabbat, is a bit of a problem because there are various melachot that it involves. But the rabbi said, of course, anybody who needs to have insulin on Shabbat must take insulin on Shabbat. Why? They're not in danger. They might not die on Shabbat if you don't give them insulin, but they might come into danger if you don't give them their insulin. It's pretty obvious that they're going to get sick. So there's an example of somebody who's not in life-threatening danger, but is automatically, the rabbis put in the category of choleh sheyesh bo sakana. Another example is a woman who has given birth within the first 3 days of birth. A woman who has given birth is automatically considered to be a choleh sheyesh bo sakana. So a woman who has had a baby within the 3 days, who says, I have to have the light on Shabbat. It's today is Shabbat. I don't want to be in the dark. I need the light on. No questions asked. You put the light on. How you put the light on, we'll discuss next week. But you put the light on because they are in the category of sheyesh bo sakana. Even though we know that today, thank God, 99.99 whatever it is % of women who've had a baby are not in life-threatening danger after they've had a baby in the first 3 days. The rabbi said, not interested in that. We think that there's a possibility, even if it's the minutest possibility, we are going to err on the side of caution, and we are going to put them in that category. So, a choleh sheyesh bo sakana, and what we'll do next week, please God, is we'll delve deeper into these categories, of who is in what category and how practically that applies to breaking Shabbat. What I wanted to do today, and which we'll just carry on the last 10 minutes, is to set the scene and to talk about the principles. Next week, we'll go into the actual nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty of how it works. The second category, you're sick, but you're not in any life-threatening or limb-threatening danger. So that might be somebody who has, let's say, the flu. Somebody who has the flu, a normal, fit, healthy person, not somebody who's in a vulnerable category. The vast majority of people with the flu, it's very unpleasant. You put yourself to bed, you dose yourself up with paracetamol and fluids, and please God, after a few days, you start to feel better, and then you're okay. You're not in life-threatening danger. That is somebody who would be in that sort of category. It's not a nothing, but it's not something which is either life-threatening, limb-threatening, or potentially life or limb-threatening. So, for example, someone with the flu. The third category is michush ba'alma, which is a Aramaic, and it means just a minor thing, just a little bit of a thing. So somebody who has a bit of a headache, for example, you're not 100% fit. It's not bad enough to put you to bed, let's say, but you've got a bit of a headache and it's Shabbat. That would be called michush ba'alma. That would be somebody with a minor illness. And we will go into next week, we'll delve deeper into these categories. I'll give you more examples. And then I will explain to you how each one of those categories must behave on Shabbat. There will be certain things that I will tell you next week, al pi halacha, that you will be surprised that they should break Shabbat. And there may be some things that you will be surprised that I'll tell you that perhaps they should not break Shabbat. But I think you'll be more surprised about the times when they should than when they shouldn't, because the important thing to remember is that we may be very strict about Shabbat, and we should be strict about Shabbat. We should not treat Shabbat in a light way. Shabbat is extremely important, as we've said. However, we need to be even more stringent about v'chai bahem. There is nothing that we need to be more stringent about than human health and human well-being and human life. And you'll see next week how stringent the rabbis were about Pikuach Nefesh. It appears to some people that they are being too lenient on Shabbat. And there are some people, and this is why this tragic death occurred, there are some people that think that they know better than the rabbis, and they are going to be stricter than the rabbis. Let me tell you what happened in this tragic death, and then I'll open it up to questions, because this is going to be the intro into next week of how to behave on Shabbat. This is exactly how not to behave on Shabbat. And this happened, tragic event, which sadly I got myself involved in after the event. This was a man who was a very learned man. Actually, he was a rabbi. He wasn't a, if you like, practicing rabbi, but he had smicha. He was an extremely learned man, knew far more than I know in terms of his Jewish learning. He was also a very well-educated secular man. He was a professional man. Actually, he was a dentist. He was a working dentist, a very highly regarded dentist. He happened to be diabetic. And he was very strict about Shabbat, and he refused to check his blood sugar on Shabbat using the machine, because he didn't want to prick his finger, because that's one of the Av Malachot, to take out blood. You're not allowed to do that. And he didn't want to put the machine on because that's electricity, and we know you don't use electricity on Shabbat. He was very strict about it. He didn't use his blood testing machine on Shabbat. Came one Shabbat, and he didn't feel well. And what he said to himself was this: I think that my blood sugar must be low. Those of you who are diabetic will know that you can either have low blood sugar, which makes you feel unwell, or you can have high blood sugar, which can make you feel unwell. He thought that the way he felt was his blood sugar was low. And the way you treat low blood sugar is that you take sugary drinks and you take sugar to push up your blood sugar. So he took some sugary things and he refused to check his blood sugar to see what it was. And he took some sugary drink and he didn't feel any better. So he took a bit more and he took a bit more and he took a bit more. The problem was that he was not suffering from low blood sugar. He was suffering from high blood sugar. So he kept on pushing his blood sugar higher and higher and higher because he refused to check his blood sugar to see what it was. And sadly, his sugar went up and up and up so high that he had a heart attack and he died. And this was a man in his early 70s with perhaps, 20, 30 years ahead of him, which was a totally avoidable death because this very wonderful man, religious man, intelligent man had misunderstood the Torah and had said, no, I am going to be stricter than I need to be on Shabbat. I'm not going to check my blood sugar. And he was completely wrong. Sadly, he paid for it with his life. This was what prompted me to have a campaign, if you like. I almost used the word crusade there, probably wouldn't be the right word, but it's that sort of feeling about this subject. When I gave that lecture about 3 months after his death, I gave this lecture to a group of 300 people from various different shuls in Manchester got together. It was on Shiva Asar Tammuz, the fast of Tammuz. Somebody said to me after the lecture, and after the whole shiur, they said to me, I could feel your anger. I could feel your anger. That's what they said to me. And that's how I felt. I felt so angry. I felt angry that this person, this really wonderful person, had lost his life because of ignorance about the halacha. And someday, I suppose, I was upset that he should have known better because he did know the halacha. And he was trying to be frummer than frum, if you like. And so it became something that I was very important to me to explain to people that Pikuach Nefesh doche et Shabbat. Pikuach Nefesh, saving a life, preservation of a life, overrides the Shabbat. And let's just summarize before I open it up to questions what we've said today. Let's go back to the top of the source sheet. I gave you all these sources of Shabbat, of how important Shabbat is. And it is important, absolutely important. It has kept us as Jews, as Achad Ha'am said. And then we spoke about the two concepts of Deoraita, Torah laws, and rabbinic laws, the Oraita and the Rabbanan. And that will come into its own next week when I explain to you how and which halachot we have to break, if you like, on Shabbat for which illnesses. So you have to bear in mind the Oraita and the Rabbanan. We'll go into that in more detail. And then we spoke a few examples of which ones are Torah laws and which ones are the Rabbanan laws, Mukta being the Rabbanan. And then we spoke about Pikuach Nefesh, the saving of a life, the source of which is in the Torah itself, in Vayikra, Vachai Bahem, repeated in the prophet Yechezkel. And I told you the story of the broken down wall, which we have to do everything in our power to remove that wall, even on Shabbat, in case the person below is still alive. And then we've spoken about the introduction for next week, which will be the three categories of sick person. Somebody who is a chola sheyesh bo sakana, which doesn't necessarily mean in immediate life-threatening danger. Somebody who is not in danger but is sick, and somebody who just has a minor inconvenience. And those three categories, together with these two categories of Shabbat law, you will see the interaction next week and the tension between, on the one hand, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, guarding the Shabbat day, and on the other hand, Vachai Bahem. It's a tension that is necessarily something one against the other. And we'll see the interplay of the Deoraita and the Rabbanan with those three categories of illness. And that will be the nitty-gritty, if you like, of next week's shiur. Today was the scene setter, I will ask Avril before we close the Zoom thing to send on the chat the source sheet. I'll also send it to Dan in an email or a WhatsApp so he can send it out to anybody that wants it. And there'll be another source sheet for next week, which we'll get ready before next week. So I'm going to now open up to questions. It's now 3 o'clock. Anybody who feels they want to go, by all means, don't feel obliged to stay. I'm hanging around for as long as people want to ask me questions. So I don't think that you're holding me back. If I need to go, I'll go. There's no, don't feel obliged to stay, but if you want to stay and ask questions, you can just unmute yourself. Ideally, if you, so that we don't have everyone speaking at once, because we've got 40 computers open at the moment. If you know how to press the hands up button, the raise hand button, that would be a good way of doing it. If you don't, then just open up your mute and shout out when there's a gap in the proceedings. So any questions? Batsheva, I think, has Natan. Batsheva, Natan has got her hand up. So yes.
Yeah, exactly. The people coming back from wherever, and they have to either be quarantined or have the bracelet. Are they allowed to use the bracelet on Shabbat? It's never turned off. Okay. It just continues to work.
Okay, that's a similar question in some ways as to the question of Alexa. You're not doing anything with that bracelet. If you're given a choice, halachically, you probably ought to stay in quarantine and not wear the bracelet, because you don't have to wear the bracelet. However, there is another tension involved, and that is something called oneg Shabbat, which means having a nice time on Shabbat, a pleasantness on Shabbat. And there are some rabbinic authorities who hold that oneg Shabbat, enjoying yourself on Shabbat, is in fact a Torah law as part of Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remembering the Shabbat day. So Zachor, remembering Shabbat day, means having a nice time on Shabbat. Now, if it means that you're locked up in a Corona hotel, having an utterly miserable Shabbat, and instead of that, you have to wear an electronic tag, which you're not doing anything with, I would suggest, I mean, you have to ask your own rabbi, you can't rely on my opinion, but if anybody were to ask me, I would say that there would be certainly a position to discuss wearing the tag. I'd need to go into a bit more detail and know all the ins and outs of it, of how it worked and what it did, etc., etc. But in principle, I wouldn't dismiss it. And it's a similar idea to the idea of sort of. I'll give you an example actually, Batsheva. I don't know if you can see this thing on my wrist there.
Yeah, I see it.
That is a Fitbit, which I wear to count my steps and do my running and all that stuff. Obviously, I take it off before Shabbat. Well, this last Shabbat, for some reason, I must have been in a rush or I wasn't thinking straight. After my shower, I put it back on. And I didn't realize that I hadn't taken it off until after Shabbat came in. So what am I to do now? Because if I take it off, I'm going to set it off. Because when you move it and take it off, and there's a light that comes on. On the other hand, if you just wear it, it's doing its thing, but I'm not actually pressing any buttons or moving things from it. So what I decided for myself was that I was best to keep it on and just not do anything with it, which is what I did, rather than actually take it off. So on that basis, if I was right there, there would certainly be a position to use the electronic tag if you weren't doing anything with it, if the alternative was an utterly and thoroughly miserable Shabbat for which there was no oneg Shabbat. But I stress to you that is not a blanket psak halacha from me. You need to discuss that, or whoever it would be would need to discuss that with their own individual rabbi.
Since I'm in Israel, I'm not coming back, so I don't have the problem.
Okay, very good.
I was just asking for information.
I think it's a very good question, and I think it's a question that people have and will ask. David, how lovely to see you.
It's my pleasure, Rabbi. Rabbi, I would like a clarification. You explained very well about keeping Shabbat, the prescribed laws that are paramount as prescribed in the Torah, and the secondary laws that have been written by the rabbis. Does this mean that the laws written by the rabbis we can interpret according to our logic? For instance, switching on the light, starting the car. Can we interpret these according to what we perceive as being logical?
Okay.
As a secondary laws.
Okay. I knew you'd ask me a difficult question, David, because you always do whenever I'm in Perth. It's a pleasure to hear your difficult questions.
And it's a pleasure to hear your answer, Rabbi.
And of course, Dan warned me about you before I even arrived. So it's lovely to see you. The answer to your question in good rabbinic style is yes and no. And yes, rabbinic laws are open to interpretation. And no, they're not open to interpretation by the likes of you and me. They have to be open to interpretation by people who know a lot, well, certainly a lot more than me. I don't know if they know a lot more, they need to know a lot more than you.
No, I certainly don't, Rabbi.
That was perhaps a little bit presumptuous of me. But yes, this is what happens over the generations, David. The interpretation of rabbinic law has dynamized over the generations. For absolute certain, that's exactly what happens. When new technology comes along, rabbis have to put their heads round how the rabbinic laws apply to new technology. Like Alexa, somebody is going to have to make a psak halacha whether you can use Alexa on Shabbat, and it's going to have to be done pretty soon. Somebody asked me this yesterday on our coach trip, and I told them what I thought, but then I, of course, gave the usual rider that you can't rely on me. You have to go and ask a proper rabbi. So the answer to your question is yes, without a doubt, rabbinic law has always, must, and always will dynamize and be interpreted according to the technology, according to the times that we live in. That is why, by the way, that is why we have an oral law. Why do we have a written law and an oral law? It wasn't because Hashem ran out of paper or stone or ink. He could have written the whole lot down. The whole reason why it was oral was that we had to use our cop. We had to use our intelligence. We had to use what we have available to us to interpret according to our times. The Torah itself says, you shall go to the shofet or the kohen, asher yeh b'yamim hahem, who will be in that day. Well, you can't go to somebody who's not in that day. So the rabbis understand by that the rabbis of your day have permission, not only permission, have an obligation to look at the halachot and to interpret them appropriately for their generation. The difficulty is when inappropriate people try to do that. So the answer is yes, they must, but no, not everybody can do that. We can't just willy-nilly apply our own logic. Logic has to be applied, but it has to be applied with great knowledge by people who are very, very familiar and deep knowledge of the sources from which they will use to reapply rabbinic law. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Debbie Lazarus, nice to see you. You'll have to unmute yourself, Debbie. Debbie, are you with us?
Yep.
There you are.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. It's been very interesting listening to what you have to say, and I wish you had tzlacha.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Vivian.
Hi, I would echo Debbie's sentiments, but I actually have a question for you. Something that has strangely sat a little heavy on my shoulders these many decades. My late mum came to stay with us very last minute, just before Shabbat, when we realized she was not very well at all. And she'd not eaten for a number of days. She'd been very sick, which was why we went to collect her so close to Shabbat. And on Shabbat morning, I said to her, can I get you anything for your breakfast, Mum? And she said, no, really, I really don't want to eat. And I said, tell me, is there anything you would really fancy? And she said, she paused for a moment. She said, actually, I'd quite fancy an omelette. Now, these many years ago, I was still quite fresh to even considering myself to be Shomer Shabbat. I'm not quite sure I could still say it now. I think it's a constant learning process, but I was very new to it. But I went downstairs and I made my mum an omelette, and it was probably the very last thing she ate. By the following day,
did she enjoy it, Vivian?
She did. She enjoyed some.
Let me say this to you. Kol ha-kavod to you. You did, in my humble opinion, for whatever it's worth, you did absolutely the right thing. She was without a doubt. And obviously, you know, I dare say Charlie was there as well, and he will have assessed the scenario and assessed that your mum was a sick lady, and she will undoubtedly have been in the halachic category of a person in life-threatening danger. And without a doubt, it was the correct thing to do. You may have said to her, you know, it's Shabbat, but if you really want it, I'll get it. She may have forgotten it was Shabbat. But other than that, I have absolutely can only say kol hakavod. And if it's sat heavily on your shoulders, I would like to lift that off your shoulders right now, and I'll take it on my shoulders, because if God forbid that were to happen again to you, do exactly the same thing. Go and make the omelette and make it nice and make sure that she enjoys it.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments before we say goodbye? Okay, well, those of you who have enjoyed it, then come again next week. Those of you that didn't, well, you can still come next week if you like. Maybe it'll be better next week. I don't know. You'll have to be the judges of that. I will send Avril, if you've already put that on. Avril, have you put it on the chat? Yeah, Avril has put the links to the Tchelet stuff on Shabbat. You'll find on our website loads of videos of shiurim that we've done. You'll find on the Facebook page all sorts of stuff there. You can dip in and have a look at that. We'll be very happy if you find something that pleases you. Yes, Batsheva, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, can I joke and say Alexa could be our Shabbos guy?
Absolutely, yeah. Alexa.
Okay. I don't know what it is, but it sounds like it could be. Alexa
could well be a Shabbos guy. By the way, I found out something in this Alexa discussion yesterday. And I'll end with this because I don't know if it's true or not. Somebody told me on the bus yesterday when we were discussing the whole concept of Alexa and Shabbos Goy, etc., that Elvis Presley was a Shabbos Goy for some families, and then later on they found out that actually he was Jewish. Yes. That his mother was of Jewish extraction. So yes. Elvis Presley was not only a Jew, he was also a Shabbos Goy. Well, I don't know. That was news to me. So those of you who already knew that, well, that's an amazing fact you already knew. Those of you who didn't, at least if you've not learned anything about Shabbat, you've learned something about Elvis Presley.
Johnny,
I've heard that his mother was part Jewish. I don't know from which side.
Well, there's a bit of research for you, Dan. I know you're like pieces of nonsense. I'll let you look into that. I'll wish those of you in Perth a very good evening. Those of you in Israel a good afternoon. Those of you in England, still just about good afternoon. And anybody who's in America, good morning. And I'll see you next week, please God.
Thank you very much. It was really good.
Thank you. Bye.